Hello again, it's Sajochi, and a short while back I made a player's guide video for one of my favorite TTRPGs, which is this on the screen, Pokemon Tabletop United. In that video I said I would make a GM's guide to this game as well, so here it is. It took a couple months. But before I do get into it, I kind of have a couple of things that I want to preface. Similar to the player's guide, I'm going to go over some of the rules that are in the game and hopefully explain them in a way that's easy to understand. Major difference is I'm going to go way more in depth with these rules than I did with the last guide. I don't want to give the impression that I'm going to go front to back explaining every single rule in detail inside of this rulebook, just the sections that I feel are the most important. And I'll even go over some of the smaller rules that are pretty easy to miss. Also similar to the player's guide, I'm going to try to stick as close to raw as possible. There might be some interpretations because a lot of the rules are incredibly open to interpretation, but that's also pretty common in other TTRPGs, so take that as you will. I'm also going to offer some other general GMing tips at the end, which should work for any TTRPG. Part 1. What you need to play. Pokemon Tabletop United is a TTRPG, so you'll just need some dice, some sheets, and there you go. You're pretty much set. You're also going to need the rulebooks, which are going to be in the Mega Doc in the description. Now, the following are just suggestions for my preferred way to play, which is online. PTU is one of the easiest games to set up on a virtual tabletop or a VTT, if you're unfamiliar with what that is, with the most known one being Roll20, which has PTU as a system that you can play. Roll20 is free to use for its basic features. It does have subscription tiers to add features. I don't really use Roll20 myself, so I don't know exactly what's on it off the top of my head, but here it is on the screen, kind of what they offer if you're interested. There's also Foundry VTT, which has the Pokemon Tabletop Reunited system module that handles most of the rules for PTU, and it also includes the errata content. I personally use Foundry, and I also highly recommend it. It is a one-time purchase for the license, but I do believe it's well worth the price for such a feature-rich VTT that also has user-created content to make it even better. Any way you do choose to play, the goal is to have fun, so go with what you think is the most fun to do. Part 2. Determine the type of campaign. This may seem like the obvious thing to do, because everybody usually has a setting in mind when it comes to running a tabletop game, but I'm not talking about creating a setting. I'm talking about what the campaign itself will involve, at least rules-wise. And one of the most important rule decisions you're going to make is whether or not you're going to allow direct trainer combat or not. This decision is basically going to set the tone of the campaign. If you allow trainer combat, the tone of the world may be that it's incredibly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, or that players may need to do whatever they can to survive. If you decide not to include trainer combat, then the tone may be similar to what it's like in the video games where people go around to catch and train Pokemon. If you decide one way or the other when it comes to trainer combat, you need to fully commit the campaign to it. Either everything involves trainer combat or nothing does. The reason I say this is because flip-flopping between two different types of initiative can be very time-consuming and also make it very hard to create encounters for. This decision is also going to make some classes feel more encouraged or discouraged. A trainer combat-focused class like the Roughneck here isn't really going to work in a campaign that doesn't have trainer combat. Next, decide whether or not to use the injuries rule. Injuries in PTU is a main rule, but it is completely optional if you want to have this in your game or not. And what it does is it offers an extra layer of management for keeping characters and Pokemon healthy. I'm going to break this next part down so that you kind of understand how a Pokemon gets an injury and what having an injury means. Whenever massive damage is dealt to a character or a Pokemon, one injury is gained. Massive damage occurs when a character takes 50% or more of their max HP as damage in one attack, and only occurs once per damaging move that causes the massive damage. For example, if a move deals damage equal to 100% of the target's HP, only one injury is gained for that instance of damage. If two moves deal damage equal to 50% of the max HP of the target, then two instances of massive damage occur, resulting in 2 injuries. Massive damage is not applied for moves that sets a target's HP, like Pain Split or Endeavor, as they are technically not dealing damage. Additionally, 1 injury is gained at specific health thresholds. These are 50% max HP, 0 HP, negative 50%, negative 100%, and negative 150%. Taking the example from before, when an attack that deals damage equal to 100% HP, 3 injuries are gained. 1 from massive damage, 1 for reaching the 50% health threshold, and 1 from reaching the 0 HP threshold. For every injury gained, max HP also gets reduced by 1/10, resulting in a temporary change to max health. The reason for this rule is so that healing gets less effective over the course of a battle and can carry over if there's multiple battles in the scene. Basically, if somebody is getting injured a lot, it's going to be harder to keep them healthy. So if we continue with the previous example, the character with 3 injuries at 100 max HP would have their max health reduced by 3/10 or 30 points, resulting in the character having 70 max HP until the injuries are healed. Calculations for getting new injuries, moves that deal damage based on max HP, and status effects like poison and badly poison all still use the original max health point value. The temporary max is not considered for anything. That means if the character were to heal back up to full, which is only going to go up to 70 HP with 3 injuries, and then they take 20 damage from an attack, they would still get another injury for reaching the 50% health threshold at 50 HP, just like they would if they were at 100 HP. If a character gains 5 or more injuries, they become heavily injured. This just means that when damage is dealt at that point, they'll take additional damage from the attack equal to the number of injuries they have. So if a character has 5 injuries and they take 10 damage, they're going to take 15 damage, which is the damage from the attack plus the number of injuries. That is a lot of math. Luckily, healing injuries is super simple and can be done in a few ways. When a character goes a 24-hour period, or basically 1 rest day, without taking a new injury, 1 injury is removed. A trainer can also spend 2 AP as an extended action to remove an injury. Some features and items can also heal injuries, and it'll vary with number and frequency. Pokemon centers will always heal 3 injuries in a short amount of time, with the calculation being 1 hour plus 30 minutes for every injury up to 4, and then an additional hour for every injury after 5 injuries. Now, there is a limit of only being able to heal up to 3 injuries per day, not including naturally healing over a 24-hour period. So if you were to take a Pokemon that's heavily injured to a Pokemon Center, they'll only heal up to 3 injuries. If you attempted to heal any additional injuries from there, you would basically have to wait until the next day to try to heal more injuries. Now with that long explanation out of the way, injuries add a sense of urgency to your campaign and make your players consider having backups for Pokemon in case one or more are out of commission for a while. If you feel like this rule is a little chaotic, you can ignore applying injuries from damage and only give them if something says it gives an injury. This includes features, moves, items, and abilities. If it still feels like it's too much, you can just ignore injuries as well. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I will say from experience though that it's common for any character or Pokemon to get around 3 to 4 injuries per scene. Anything higher is usually a rarity or only happens if your players are not paying attention to injuries as they happen. And then the last thing to decide is if Pokemon and character death can happen in your campaign. This is actually something that I would say is not for everybody. The topic of death, especially for a game like Pokemon, but even this is something that I would say is not for every table. So if this is something that you want to include, make sure your players are also comfortable with it. Death happens when one of the following conditions happen. When a character or a Pokemon's health is brought down to negative 50 HP or negative 200% their max HP, whichever is the lowest value. The other condition is when a character gains 10 injuries without healing them. That's because at that point, they essentially have 0 max HP. Reaching 0 health points does not equal instantaneous death in this game. A character is just going to get the fainted condition. But being fainted also leaves them highly vulnerable, and taking additional damage at that stage can be very deadly. That's, again, if you only choose to include death in your campaign. If you decide not to, there's nothing wrong with it. So with these 3 rulings, trainer combat, injuries, and death, you can really set what the tone of your campaign is, and they can either fit in perfectly or just not at all. If you want something lighthearted, you might want to ignore all 3 of these. If you want realistic, you may want to choose 2 out of the 3. If you're a GM that likes to make gritty realism, go with all of them. That's why I say it's good to kind of be familiar with these specifically. Now, this next bit of advice is not really a rule, but a recommendation. The system is designed around the players playing a human trainer who catches Pokemon. I know a lot of GMs and a lot of other people have tried to make a Mystery Dungeon style campaign using PTU's rules, but the devs of PTU strongly recommend against that. It doesn't really work for that type of campaign setting without a lot of homebrewing, and at that point, you're basically playing a different system anyways. If that is something that you are interested in running, I suggest taking a look at Pokeroll, which does have a Mystery Dungeon rulebook for its system. I might go over that in the future, but I'm not really familiar with it. We'll see what happens. But back to talking about PTU, especially when it comes to the important part. Part 3. Decide your Pokedex. Right now, as of Generation 9, there are 1,000 plus Pokemon in the main series games. The PTU Pokedex document only goes up to Generation 6, and there are homebrew expansions that add up to Generation 8. Again, all of these are available in the Mega Doc in the description. I will be saying that a lot. At the time of this recording, the owner of the Mega Doc doesn't have plans to add Generation 9 or later gens, but there are some attempts going on right now to create a homebrew Gen 9 dex based off of their guidelines. Considering all of this, you may not want to include every Pokemon ever created in your campaign. A general number that works well is to have a dex that totals around 100 Pokemon. This does consider Pokemon in evolution lines as individual Pokemon for this total. So if your dex has Bulbasaur, then Ivysaur and Venusaur is going to take up a spot in the dex. Again, this is just a suggestion. You can add as many Pokemon as you want. You could add them all. It's your campaign. Do whatever you feel. That suggestion doesn't really apply to your player's starter Pokemon. You could have it where your players have a starter that does not appear normally in the region you create, or you can let your player choose a starter based on the following suggestions from the rulebook. The main rule for a Pokemon to be considered a starter Pokemon is that it needs to have the Underdog capability, and it needs to have at least 3 evolution stages. Pokemon with Underdog simply have a base stat total under 45, and most, if not all, basic Pokemon have the capability anyways. You may still want to restrict Pokemon that evolve into pseudo-legendaries like Dratini and Larvitar, and you may also want to restrict certain types like Ghost and Steel. There is this list in the core rulebook, and I think it's a pretty good one to consider if you want to try to decide on expanding the range of starter Pokemon that your players can have. A tool that I highly recommend is the World of Pokemon region generator. You can get an idea about what kind of region you're going to have, and it's also going to populate Pokemon that can appear. It's a really good tool, and I'm also going to include this in the description as well. Another suggestion for this section is to have your players make a wish list of Pokemon that they wish to find and possibly catch. This is also going to help you build up your decks. To summarize this section, having a smaller pool of Pokemon in a region tends to make things easier for building encounters, which is going to bring us to the next section. Part 4. Encounter building. Encounter building is a very important concept to get down. In PTU, encounters are mostly related to battles, and the main rewards from these encounters is going to be experience for Pokemon. Now, I'm going to kind of go over how to make relatively balanced encounters in the game. And I say relative because there's a lot of factors that can make the encounter easier or harder. And these are things like type combinations, moves that are available to the Pokemon, ability combos, stuff like that. There are 2 things that you'll want to keep in mind whenever you make any type of encounter. The significance of the encounter when it comes to the story and plot progression, as well as the levels of the combatants that your players are going to fight against. Significance is how much the experience reward per player is multiplied by, with the multiplier going from 1 times to 5 times. Whenever you calculate any type of experience rewards, you take the total level of the defeated enemy combatants to determine the baseline rewarded experience. Then you multiply the baseline by the significance multiplier to get the total rewarded experience. Finally, you divide that by the number of players to determine how much experience each of them is supposed to get so that they can apply it to their Pokemon in any way they choose. If you have trainer combat enabled in your game, then the defeated trainer combatant counts as double their level when calculating this reward. The higher the multiplier, the more important the encounter is to the narrative, with one-off encounters being between 1 to 1.5 times, smaller story points being 2 times to 3 times, and story shifting milestones at the 4 times to 5 times multiplier. You might be thinking, well, this is just like difficulty, isn't it? And it can seem like that at first glance, but the book states that this is significant to the story. Story significance and challenge are separate in the system, but both used well can help you create satisfying encounters. Let's run an example with the assumption that this is a battle with trainer combat. Let's say we have an encounter with 2 level 10 Pokemon and 1 level 5 trainer. The experience reward would be 30 total, 20 for the Pokemon and 10 for the trainer. This is a slightly important fight, but nothing too world changing, so a 2 times significance multiplier is assigned, making the total reward 60. If we're running a game with 3 players, they will each earn 20 experience points for defeating the challenge, and they can distribute that amongst their Pokemon as they please. Pokemon experience in this case is kind of like a currency. They will just divide the 20 experience among the Pokemon that they want to start leveling up. The next thing to understand here is the level budget of the encounter, which is the total levels of the enemy combatants your players are going to fight. There is a guideline in the core book that I do recommend using in the beginning because it does make building encounters easier. It works by taking the experience you want to reward to your players and then working backwards from there. And to kind of figure out how much experience you want to give to your players, first, take the average level of all Pokemon your players have and multiply that number by 2, using that as the baseline experience reward that you want to give per player. Then, you take that baseline experience and you multiply it by the number of players. This is going to determine the level budget that you're going to work with. So back to our example with 3 players, we're going to give them each a level 5 starter. Since the average level is going to be 5 for these 3 level 5 Pokemon, we're going to multiply that by 2 to give us a base experience drop of 10. This is then multiplied again by the number of players to get a level budget of 30. So using this budget, we can make an encounter where the players have to engage in direct combat with 3 trainers, each with 1 Pokemon, if we want to match the action economy. So we'll have 3 level 5 Pokemon on the opposing side, which total 15 levels, and the 3 trainers are all at level 1. So the trainer counts as twice your level if they're in direct combat. That's another 6 levels used from the budget, which means we've already used 21 out of the 30 that we would have had. With the remaining 9, we can do a few things here. We could either designate a Pokemon as a boss, which I'm going to go over how to make bosses in a bit. We could increase some of the levels of the Pokemon on the field, or we could just add more NPCs into the battle. I'm going to go with the option of adding another trainer at level 2 with a level 5 Pokemon so that we use up those last 9 levels easily. Some of you might have noticed that significance was not used to determine level budget, and I'm going to basically repeat myself. Significance is not used to determine difficulty, it only determines the significance to the story that encounter has. If you were to include the significance multiplier in your level budget, you might end up making an extremely overtuned or undertuned encounter for your players. Initially, I did say that the direct reward from encounters is going to be experience for Pokemon, but your players are also gaining experience from these encounters, but it's on a much smaller scale. In PTU, trainers only need 10 experience to level up. Whether it's from level 1 or to level 50, doesn't matter, it's only going to cost 10 experience for them to level up. With this, the rewards from encounters are going to be much smaller. The easiest way to do this is by granting experience to the trainer equal to the significance multiplier. This usually means that no more than 5 experience will be gained from a single encounter, but you can adjust as needed. For the truly important encounters like gym battles or things that are extremely important to the story, you might want to grant the milestone level up instead. For non-combat encounters, still grant some experience, as out-of-combat scenarios can still be significant to the story. And in a situation where a player would have earned a milestone level up upon victory, but they got defeated, grant a couple experience points if it feels appropriate. A loss can still be valuable learning experience. The book seems to imply that you use both trainer experience and milestones together, but I do recommend using whatever method of trainer progression you feel comfortable with. Part 5. Building your NPCs. Very simple rule when you're building NPCs, whether it's a trainer or a Pokemon. Do not create full build. Creating characters takes a lot of time, and you're not going to be able to fully build an NPC on the fly. For Pokemon, it's pretty simple to stat encounters, and you can do one of 2 things. 1. Pick health, 1 attacking stat, and 1 defending stat, or speed, and evenly distribute level up points between the 3 stats you chose. Or 2. Evenly distribute level up points across all 6 stats, with 1 stat getting the priority for remaining points. Then when you have your stats distributed, pick 2 to 3 moves from the Pokemon's level up list, keeping a balance between offense and defense, and maybe take 1 every other turn move or a scene move if it's available. Stick with the first ability from each category and don't bother with nature. Now you got a Pokemon that's battle ready and it's not going to take you too long to make them. When it comes to trainers, you gotta think a little differently, as they have the same tools your players have, like items and feature. The book also says not to completely build them unless they're an important NPC like a gym leader or maybe a recurring NPC. For quickly building your NPCs, designate a level, pick a handful of features and edges that you think would be useful during the encounter, or that you feel would be common for trainers across the campaign, randomly choose a training order that they'll use during battle, and then pick 1 or 2 skills to increase past untrained. Optionally, you can also decide to give them items. I say about 1 to 3 items is a pretty good balance. Trainers also get level up points. You'll want to distribute them the same way that you would do for Pokemon if the trainer is going to fight directly, or just put all the points into speed if you don't run trainer combat. Some decent features to give are the Ace Trainer class features for campaigns that don't use trainer combat. Otherwise, pick your favorite combat class features or whatever you think is going to be cool. and go from there. Don't forget to add extra stats from features as needed as well. One of my suggestions is to keep a note somewhere with a list of easy to use features for the quick build NPCs, or maybe have a few templates or stat blocks available that are easy enough to reference. For your important NPCs, fully build them like you would fully build a player character. You're gonna want that, which kind of brings us to our next bit. Part 6, making your bosses. Nothing says a TTRPG like a good boss encounter, and PTU does give a lot of leeway to make truly unique and powerful bosses, and I'm going to go quickly over the rules to build these bosses. I'll begin with what most GMs are probably going to make first, which is going to be gym leaders. And because this is a tabletop game, you're going to need to think outside the box for these gym challenges. Think less like the video games and more like the anime. You can have a gym leader test the cleverness of players by having hazards or puzzles on the field during the battle. You can have a gym challenge that is just a foot race with Pokemon. There's a big number of ways that you can handle this. I recommend taking a read through page 481 here. It gives a few recommendations on what you can do to create unique mechanics for your gym challenges, and it's definitely super helpful. Gym leaders don't need to follow the same character building rules that other trainers have, as they're supposed to be the best in the region. You can give them features without them needing to meet requirements. You can give them special actions or items, like a specific weapon that maybe grants a Pokemon move. You could even give them abilities that are typically outside of the class features or what a regular trainer is going to have access to. Like maybe you got a gym leader that has the ability to read minds better than the supernatural classes. I still recommend using trainer level as a good way to determine strength, since that's a clear indicator how many features a trainer should have, especially for a gym leader. The idea is you want to challenge your players, you don't want to put them in a completely unwinnable situation. And because these are still trainers, one of the suggestions I typically have is to give their ace Pokemon the boss template. They get to act multiple times around, they tend to stay in battle a little longer because they have a higher health pool, and injuries don't affect them the way that normal Pokemon are affected by injuries. Let's break down building a boss Pokemon. First, you need to determine how many turns the Pokemon gets per round. The simplest way to figure this out is to count how many active fighters the players have on their side, and to use that as sort of a baseline for the number of turns the boss will have. So if your players are going to have 6 active combatants, then the boss should have 6 or more turns. For mini bosses, you might want to use a fraction of this, as they're not supposed to be as strong as a full boss. After you figure out the number of turns, you need to figure out where it's going to act in initiative. When doing this, you follow regular initiative rules. A Pokemon's speed will always determine its initiative. Every time the boss acts, you subtract 5 from its speed after the first turn, continuing even if the boss has 0 speed by the end. Take the following example that I'm going to put on screen here. So we have an Aerodactyl that's going to be a boss, and it has a speed of 20, and I gave it 4 turns. Since it's fighting against 4 Pokemon, the initiative is going to go like this. Kadabra first at 23 speed, then Aerodactyl at 20, then Apom at 17, then Aerodactyl at 15 speed, and then again at 10 speed, then Aron and Audino at 6 speed, and then at the very end, Aerodactyl takes its last turn at 5 speed. This will repeat like this every round until there's a winner. Since the boss can act multiple times per round, frequency for moves is going to behave a little differently. Every other turn moves and scene moves can be used multiple times per round. If Aerodactyl used an every other turn move on the first turn, when its second turn at initiative 15 comes up, it won't be able to use that same every other turn move, but when its turn comes up again at 10, it can use that move again. Now that you have the turns decided, you're going to want to grant the boss a number of health bars that's equal to the number of turns they have. This is the same as taking their maximum HP and then multiplying it by the number of turns. When it comes to calculating any type of damage, only the current active health bar is affected. If a move or an effect will deal damage based off of a percentage of the boss's max health, you only calculate damage as if it has 1 health bar. Whenever a health bar is reduced to 0, the boss will go into the next health bar as if it has full health. Also, any damage that kind of overflows from the previous health bar will hit the next one. Whenever a health bar is depleted, you want to make the boss seem staggered, which does nothing mechanically. It's more of a narrative tool to let your players know that what they're doing is working. You still get to do a few fun things when a boss does lose a health bar. These include, but are not limited to, increasing a random combat stage, clearing a volatile effect, regaining a use of a scene move, healing an injury. It may mega evolve. On the other side of it, you can also apply a negative effect to bosses when they lose a health bar. I recommend doing this if you might have overtuned a fight and you need to give your players an advantage somewhere. You do got a lot of freedom on how you do this. and it's a good idea to have a list of things that can happen when a health bar is reduced to 0. On the very last health bar, have your boss go all out. Make it a type of hyper mode that gives a much stronger effect than what you've been throwing out throughout the entire fight. You can make it get maximum combat stages in a stat, or maybe a couple stats. Maybe it starts to use a move that it hasn't used so far in battle. Really think about a lot of the things that you can do with this type of mechanic and have fun with it. Everything that I throw out are just a few examples. There's a lot of ways that you can go about this, and this all depends on your creativity. The one thing to keep in mind for bosses is that they do not gain injuries the normal way. Bosses will only take an injury when they take massive damage, reach half of the health bars that they have, or an ability or move says that they get an injury. Injuries will still affect the maximum health of each health bar. That's why bosses will gain less injuries over a course of a combat. Another thing that you'll need to consider is that some status afflictions are going to be altered. Afflictions that cause damage over time will only happen once per round at the end of the boss's first turn. This is things like poison, bad poison, the trapping moves, ghost curses effect, stuff like that. Effects like sleep or frozen do not stop a boss from acting completely. Instead, it just reduces their evasion by half, and if they fail a save on these, their damage is reduced by 10. Disable will also only affect one move at a time, and if your boss Pokemon is defeated, the experience reward from it should be significant. In the example that I had, the Aerodactyl was level 20 with 4 turns. That Aerodactyl is the equivalent of 4 Pokemon. So a suggestion that I have is, whatever level the Pokemon is, multiply that by the number of turns, and that is the amount of experience that your players will earn for their Pokemon. Another type of boss Pokemon are swarms. This type of boss represents a large group of Pokemon and is a good way to have your players fight a lot of Pokemon at once without statting each of them in the group. Like boss Pokemon, swarms also get to act on multiple turns and get multiple health bars, but they have the following rules in place. Swarms have action points equal to its swarm multiplier from 1 times to 5 times, called swarm points. A swarm's actions cost points to use, with at-will actions costing 1 point, every other turn actions costing 2, scene moves costing 3, and daily moves costing 4. The first standard action used by the swarm that round is free. Swarms can act multiple times a round until they have 0 swarm points, following the same initiative rules as bosses. Swarms can use scene and daily moves a number of times per round equal to its current swarm multiplier. When a swarm's health bar is depleted, the swarm multiplier goes down by 1. Additionally, swarms are not affected by injuries. They don't gain injuries at all. But on the other side, moves have a bonus to hit equal to the swarm multiplier. Just keep in mind, single target attacks are resisted 1 step by the swarm. Area of effect moves or moves that would hit multiple targets are considered 1 step more super effective. If a move were to cause a swarm to lose actions like sleep or freeze, then it loses 1 swarm point per action loss. Just note, a swarm will always act at least once regardless of the save result. Those 2 templates are the ones that have very specific rules in the book, but they're not the only types of bosses that you can make. The other suggestions that are in there are things like giant Pokemon who get new abilities, moves, and boost the stats that go along with the increased size, Pokemon that have different typings and abilities, and even Pokemon that could have different types of effects for status effects. Definitely give this section a read, it's on page 477. This will give you a lot of really good ideas to make something that's extremely memorable for your players. But with that long section out of the way, we're going to move on. Part 7. Downtime. Over the course of a campaign, your players aren't just going to be going from one battle to another, and there's going to be some sessions where there's only a social encounter the entire session. This also means that your player characters will have downtime in between encounters. During these downtime sessions, they're going to have a few options available to them. They can retrain features and edges, they can work on a long-term goal like Pokemon breeding or crafting, they can spend some time looking for a specific Pokemon to capture as well. The few examples that I could provide is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I want to focus on 3: retraining, breeding, and crafting. For retraining, a player can spend trainer experience from their experience bank to retrain a feature, an edge, or change 1 level up point to another stat, with 2 experience for features and 1 experience for edges and level up points. Retraining cannot be done on features and edges that are a requirement for other features and edges that are already obtained. If you're not using trainer experience, you could just say that retraining will take some extended time. Next up is breeding, which is a little bit more complicated, and I do recommend leaving it for downtime sessions. Basically, if a trainer has the breeder edge, or you decide that anyone can attempt this regardless of having the edge, your player can roll a Pokemon education check to see if the Pokemon they have that are compatible will produce an egg. If they allow the Pokemon to spend more time alone uninterrupted, an egg will be produced. When an egg is produced this way, You, as the GM, determine the species by rolling a d20, where 5 or higher is the female Pokemon species and 4 and lower is the male Pokemon species. Then you build a baby Pokemon that will hatch, working with your player to see if they determine the nature, ability, and gender of the Pokemon depending on their Pokemon education rank. From there, you check the possible inheritance moves from egg moves and TMs the Pokemon can learn from both parents, and you create an additional list for that. When that baby Pokemon reaches level 20 and every 10 levels after, it can learn a move from the inheritance moves list as if it's a level up move. After you've built the baby Pokemon, determine a time frame for the egg to hatch. This time frame is listed under the Pokemon's Dex entry in the Pokedex documents, but you can also make it different if you'd like. Usually around 3 sessions after acquiring an egg is a good enough time for the egg to hatch. Optionally, you can also use the baby Pokemon template here on page 213 to make baby Pokemon slightly weaker for some time. The guideline is to reduce the Pokemon's base stats by a small number, and then every 5 levels, the base stats will increase by 1 until the Pokemon is at their normal stat value. Let's say a trainer has a Dratini egg that hatched. You can decide to reduce all of Dratini's base stats by 2. At level 6, Dratini's stats will increase by 1, and at level 11, the stats will be back to normal for the species. This template can also be a good way to grant your players legendary Pokemon by lowering the base stats to around where other regularly strong Pokemon are. And you can also decide to make that change permanent, or maybe it boosts up a little bit. Last is crafting, which is very simple and doesn't really take a lot of thought to run. So the simple rules are that in order to craft an item, a trainer needs a recipe, an appropriate crafting edge or feature, and access to a crafting kit in some way. They can usually purchase the kit, or they can find a facility that has one available. Recipes can be gained from crafting edges, and can also be gained from some crafting class features like the Fashionista and Researcher, and each recipe has a listed price for how much it will cost in materials to craft the desired item. Though in cases like the Gem Lore Edge and Crystal Artificer feature, specific items will be needed instead of money. Seeing as most items that can be crafted have a listed cost, the way to handle this is to award scrap to your players that is used for crafting. Scrap is always 1-to-1 in value to regular currency and can be gained in 2 ways, either by scavenging for it or by breaking down items. When breaking down an item, the player will need the appropriate crafting kit and must be able to craft the item they wish to scrap, getting half the item's crafting costs back. For example, a player with the basic Ball's Edge can break down Pokeballs to get 50 scrap back for each one they break down. Scrap is further divided into categories, since different kits craft items from specific categories like medicine and food. Scrapping food items to craft Pokeballs doesn't really make a lot of sense, though this alleviates a lot of confusion on what resources a player has on hand to make items. Recommended categories are food, medicines, repellents, Pokeballs, and fashion items for the Fashionista. Part 8. The little things. Now that I've touched on the major rules, I'm going to go over the smaller ones that can be easily missed while reading, and I doubt I'm going to be able to get to every last one in this video. Starting with combat, I did cover that a bit in the player's guide where there's 2 types, full contact and league. I'm going to briefly go over how each one handles initiative. Full contact fights have every participant act in order of fastest speed to slowest speed, regardless if it's a trainer or a Pokemon. League battles start with trainers taking action from slowest speed to fastest, then Pokemon acting from fastest to slowest. Now, there is a major difference in the terms of actions that can be used. What isn't allowed in a league battle is usually good to go in a full contact fight. Features, items, and actions might say that it's unusable in league battles, but you're the GM, you can decide what is a league legal action and what isn't. It's easier to do this if you're not running trainer combat, but if you are, it's probably better to run full contact style battles for initiative, with specific regulations when fighting a league opponent. Next is rewards. The book has a few suggestions for rewarding players, with the most direct one being cash rewards. There's not really a table for how much your players should earn at what level, so you'll need to use your own discretion for this. The primary source of income a trainer will have is from battles, so the few general guidelines are that young or inexperienced trainers probably won't have more than 2,000 currency to give. Higher level trainers will have probably around 5,000 or more depending. And finally, your gym leaders and your very important NPCs might give somewhere around 4,000 to 8,000, along with some kind of item prize like a TM. These values might seem a little high, but just keep in mind that cash prizes are always split amongst your players. Next up, when a player catches a wild Pokemon, it's considered a good rule to let them build that Pokemon. Let them distribute the level up points available, let them choose the ability that they would like the Pokemon to have appropriate to the level, you roll for that Pokemon's nature, either by assigning one that you feel is appropriate or rolling for it. To roll for that, just roll 2d6, one for the positive stat and one for the negative stat, with 1 to 6 corresponding with HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed in that order. Page 199 in the core rulebook will have the nature chart, and the same chart is also going to be in the reference doc. When a Pokemon evolves, all level up points are refunded and can be distributed by your players again. Vitamins and features that boost base stats that were applied before evolution remain on the Pokemon, but will affect the new base stats going forward. And the very last thing that you should understand is training. Training is something that every player is going to do, and everyone should be familiar with the limits of training. A trainer can spend 1 hour training up to 6 Pokemon at a time. They can apply training features, teach new moves, teach Poke Edges, or apply trainer class features. As long as it is part of training, it can all be done in this hour segment. When it comes down to applying trainer features, like agility and brutal training, the effect lasts until the end of the next extended rest. Experience training can also be applied during these training sessions and follow their own rules. I also touched on this in the player's guide, but the basics are that a trainer can apply experience training to a number of Pokemon equal to their command rank, granting half the Pokemon's level as experience, along with a flat bonus depending on their command rank, or another skill if an edge or feature allows it. A Pokemon can only benefit from experience training once per day. Part 9. General GM Tips. Now we are at the last part, and I do promise that this is the last part of the video. I just want to give a quick thank you for sticking with me for this long, and I do promise I'm going to go through this as fast as possible. It's probably nothing you haven't already heard. This next part is just general GM tips and are aimed for newer GMs looking to get into the hobby. If you watch this video to learn about PTU and decide to click off, I do hope you have a good rest of your day, and I wish you a good time in your next game. For anybody else that stuck around, GMing is both fun and frustrating, as you're not only running the game, you're also acting as a teacher, you're acting as a lawyer, you're being the storyteller, you're just doing a lot. You're going to have some high points in your game, you may have some low points. Hopefully these tips help alleviate some of the frustrations and might also give you a little bit of inspiration. First, and this is mentioned every single time, have a session 0. This is repeated across any guide for GMs for any system. Always have a session before the main campaign where you can sit down with everyone and establish ground rules for the table. This is also where you're going to establish your house rules for the system that you're running and can answer questions your players may have about the world you're crafting. I see a lot of GMs use this session as a time to also go through character creation, and I personally agree with doing that, as it also gives your players a chance to interact with the rules a little bit. Second, be willing to compromise. If you're playing with strangers, everyone is going to have a different idea of what they want to do in the game. You don't have to give in to every whim of your players, but you also can't be so rigid in how the game is supposed to go. Neither path will be fun for anyone. Find a good middle ground to work with and be open to ideas as long as you're comfortable doing so. Third, and this is going to go into the game prep itself, find a player who is good at taking notes, especially if you're not so good at note taking or can't really find the time to do it. Ask them if they would like to be the group scribe. Good notes are going to go a long way in prepping for the next session and can also help you design good plot hooks. Finally, don't worry about not having the skills to make detailed maps, or having the money to get miniatures, or even a custom TTRPG table. All you're going to need is paper, some pens, a few dice, and a block of time where you and a small group of friends can relax and have an adventure. There are tons of free options out there for TTRPGs. Find the one that interests you, do your best to learn the rules, and see if you can get some people together to give it a go. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I really do hope I was able to help you in your journey to learning PTU, and if you're planning on starting your own game soon, let me know in the comments how it's going. I'm always curious about what other people are doing with their campaigns, and I especially love to see when people are playing Pokemon Tabletop. I am going to have links in the description where you can go to get the rulebooks for PTU. And for anyone interested in playing on Foundry, the Discord to the Pokemon Tabletop Reunited server will be provided as well. That's my preferred way to play the game, and the devs for the system module are really cool and they're really friendly. If you like this type of content and you want to see more, be sure to give a like and also subscribe so you can know when I put something new out. If you're also interested in supporting me more, I do have a Patreon. Also, if you like watching streams, I do that too. Alright, this is going on a bit too long. Have a good day, everybody.